Traditionally, responding to such emergencies has been a joint effort among the local. Is guaranteed, it's incumbent upon us as a city to work toward easing the financial and emotional weight on displaced residents and ensuring such residents are afforded immediate assistance in times of crisis. To that end, we'll be considering a number of pieces of legislation. Intro 749 by Councilmember Gutierrez, as Chair Arriola has mentioned, would my notes are a little, would create an office that would function as a central support to city residents who have been displaced from their homes following a residential fire or other natural disaster. I want to take a moment to express my unhappiness, my disappointment that NISM is not here, the Office of Emergency Management. They declined to join us at the hearing, whereas this bill would create an office within their agency. It's disappointing that they're not here to speak on their bill today. 750, Intro 750, also by Councilmember Gutierrez, would require the respondent to a DOB notice of violation to correct major and lesser violations within 30 days from the date of the order and correct immediately hazardous violations forthwith. This bill would also remove DOB's rulemaking authority to adjust correction timelines. And I know Councilmember Gutierrez will speak on this, but the purpose of many of these bills here, and the reason why I am also supporting Councilmember Gutierrez's package of legislation, is because there are landlords in the city of New York that weaponize fires. They weaponize tragedies as opportunities for displacement, for speculative purposes, and we want to limit that and effectuate repairs where we can. Intro 751 would require FDNY in consultation with the New York City Office of Emergency Management and other relevant agencies to develop a residential fire emergency response guide for residents affected or displaced by a fire. Resolution 307 calls upon the New York State Legislature to pass, by Councilmember Riley, New York State Legislature to pass and the governor to sign legislation that limits the duration of time for which a landlord can collect payment from loss of rent insurance coverage without conducting meaningful repairs. Again, you need to show your work. You need to show that you're trying to get people back into their homes. And Resolution 802 by Councilmember Juan calls upon the New York State Legislature to pass and the governor to sign Senate Bill 3886, Assembly 5427, in relation to protecting tenants displaced due to a fire. I'd like to thank my Chief of Staff, Maria Villalobos, Director of Land Use, Policy and Budget, Ben Ratner, Gerard Fernandez, Carla Dominguez, and the Housing and Buildings Committee staff, Austin Maloney, to my left, Jose Conde, Andrew Bourne, Dirk Spencer, Jack Story, and Reese Hirota for all your work today, as well as my co-chair, Chair Arriola, and the team members of the Fire and Emergency Management Committee for all your work to prepare for this hearing. I am joined today by Councilmember Gutierrez, Riley, and De La Rosa, and Abreu. Thank you for joining today. Oh, and Hudson, sorry, you were hidden behind our council. And with that, I'd like to turn it to Councilmember Gutierrez, followed by Councilmember Riley to speak on their bills.
Thank you so much, Chair Sanchez and Arriola, for hearing these bills. The bills before us, known collectively as the Back Home Act, that I authored in partnership with Councilmember Krishnan and so many of my colleagues that are sponsors, represent a comprehensive and long overdue legislative response to the crisis that so many New Yorkers face after being displaced from their homes due to fires, floods, or other emergencies. This isn't hypothetical. This is a devastating reality for thousands of tenants and small property owners every year, and too often they are left completely alone to navigate it. We've heard heartbreaking stories from families forced to sleep on relatives' couches, leave the city, or find other temporary solutions, unsure of their rights, their timelines, or whether they'll ever be able to return home. We've met small landlords stuck in a web of bureaucracy, trying to do the right thing, but with no support or clarity from the city. What happens after a fire is not just an insurance issue. It's a housing matter, it's a health matter, and it's an equity matter. These challenges don't fall evenly. Race, income, immigration status, and household composition all shape how quickly or if someone gets back home. This legislative package is designed to meet that reality head-on. It addresses the gaps, the inefficiencies, and the silence that often follows the sirens. The Back Home Act is rooted in the lived experiences of displaced New Yorkers. It offers structure where there's been chaos, accountability where there's been confusion, and support where there's been none. It's a reflection of our belief that no New Yorker should be left to navigate the aftermath of a disaster alone. We can and must do better, and this is where it begins. And I just want to say that my district experienced yet another fire a couple months ago while I was out on maternity leave. I don't know if those tenants will be here today, but I really would love for the administration to listen, because I know everyone does their individual job and does the best that they can, but there's a lot that government can be doing, that we can be doing to fill those gaps. And what these folks want is a sense of orientation, and they just don't have that. And I also just want to double down on Chair Sanchez's disappointment about not having NYSEM here to join us to discuss whether or not they support the bill. It would have been really vital to have their voice and their concerns expressed here today. Thank you, chairs.
Thank you, Councilmember Riley.
Thank you, Chair Sanchez, and thank you, Chair Ariola. Good morning to the administration. Across New York City, we've seen how devastating fires can be, families losing their homes in an instant and forced into uncertainty, with negligent landlords failing to take proper responsibility for supporting displaced tenants. Together with Councilmember Juan and Chair Sanchez, we're calling on the New York State Legislature to pass and the Governor to sign State Senate Bill 3886, which is sponsored by our colleagues in the Senate, Senator Michael Genaris, and Assembly Bill 5427, sponsored by our colleagues in the Assembly, Assemblymember Claire Valdez. This legislation ensures families are protected when landlords fail in their duties. When unsafe conditions cause a fire, it's the tenants who suffer while landlords evade responsibilities or neglect timely repairs. Resolution 802 ensures that when landlords are found at fault, they, not displaced tenants or the city, covers the cost of temporary housing. This is not about punishing responsible landlords. It's about ensuring accountability when negligent landlords cause harm. Displacement should not result in permanent instability, yet too many tenants are trapped in a cycle of waiting months or even years for repairs with no clear timeline. This is a reality faced by residents in my district, such as those affected by the residents that our chair just mentioned, the fire that took place at 2910 Wallace Avenue, and by many across our city. This legislation incentivizes landlords to act swiftly so tenants can return to their homes as soon as possible. I appreciate my colleagues who supported this bill and looking forward to hearing from the administration. Thank you.
Thank you so much, council members and chair. With that, I'll turn it over to our committee counsel to administer the oath.
Please raise your right hand. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and to answer all council member questions honestly? Thank you. You may begin.
Good morning, Chairs Ariola and Sanchez and committee members. My name is John Esposito, and I am the Chief of the Department of the New York City Fire Department. Introduction 751 would require the Fire Department to develop a residential guide to be distributed to residents affected by fire. The guide must include a summary of relevant agencies and their roles, best practices concerning renters insurance, and suspending utilities for residential tenants displaced by fire. Information on any city, state, federal organizations that provide emergency housing assistance, disaggregated by borough. Information on any city, state, federal organizations or agencies that provide emergency aid to individuals, landlord duties and tenant protections following a fire, and information pertaining to inspections. Under this bill, responding firefighters are required to distribute the guide. The guide would also be distributed to tenants on location of all post-fire inspections. The fire department has serious concerns about this bill. Operationally, it would add significant burdens to firefighters during a critical period when they must focus on two urgent responsibilities. Depending on the nature of the fire, firefighters must either immediately undertake decontamination process to clean themselves and their gear, or make themselves available to respond to the next emergency. Slowing down either of these processes increases the risk to the firefighters and to the member of the community who experienced the next fire. The bill also presents logistical concerns. Given the requirement, each guide would be several pages long. It is unclear how firefighters would transport great volumes of paper guides to and from each fire, and how the guides would be stored and distributed without becoming contaminated or damaged. The fire department is also not in a position to keep up-to-date information about the many categories of information required by the legislation, most of which are outside the scope of the responsibilities of the fire department. These concerns are also true for Section D of the bill, which would require fire inspectors to transport and distribute the guide at each inspection following a fire. We understand that the Council would like to provide resources to residents in the aftermath of a fire. However, doing so places the burden on the first responders. However, doing so by placing the burden on the first responders fighting the fire is not workable. I would like now to pass it to my colleague from the Department of Buildings, who will discuss Intro 750.
Good morning, Chair Sanchez and Ariola and committee members. My name is Jamel Isidore. I'm Assistant Commissioner for Administrative Policy and Enforcement. I'm joined by my colleagues, Yagal Shamash, Deputy Commissioner for Enforcement, Guillermo Patino, Deputy Commissioner for Policy and Legal Affairs, and Frank McCartan, Assistant Commissioner for Emergency Services with the New York City Department of Buildings. Introduction 750 would require all major and minor violations issued by the Department of Buildings, DOB, which pertain to non-urgent conditions, to be corrected within 30 days. In recent years, DOB amended its rules to allow these violations to be corrected within 60 days, giving property owners more time to make repairs and avoid penalties following an oath hearing. The established timeframes account for administrative processes, due process considerations, and the time required for property owners to hire professionals and obtain permits for corrective action. The proposed change would negatively impact small businesses and owners of 1 or 2 family homes who may lack the capital to complete repairs within 30 days. Requiring corrections within 30 days would also increase DOB's workload, particularly for staff handling permit reviews, certificate approvals, and oath violation hearings. Violation information, including correction dates, is already publicly available on the building's DOB profile information page and through New York City Open Data. Therefore, the information being sought is already readily available. The bill would also require applicants seeking a demolition permit from DOB subsequent to a vacate order issued by HPD to demonstrate the steps they've taken to correct any violating conditions. That may include submitting financial statements, estimates, and invoices to DOP as part of an application for a demolition permit. DOB does not see the need for such documentation as part of a demolition application. DOB is open to further discussion to better understand this provision's intent and to explore potential solutions. Now I'd like to pass it over to my colleagues from HPD to talk about the Certificate of No Harassment and Introduction 817.
Good morning, Chair Sanchez and Ariola and committee members. My name is Anne Marie Santiago, Deputy Commissioner for Enforcement and Neighborhood Services at HPD, and I am joined by my colleague, Youngju Kim, Assistant Commissioner for Emergency Housing Services. Regarding the changes to the Certificate of No Harassment pilot program and the criteria for an automatic denial of such certification, a report from HPD on the program and its effectiveness is due to the City Council in November 2025, and the program will require reauthorization in 2026 by the City Council. We would like to assess the impact of the change recommended by Intro 750 during this period, and if appropriate, make any changes to the program during the reauthorization. On initial assessment, we have some legal concerns that including administrative orders as a criteria upon which to deny the certificate. We have some legal concerns that including administrative orders as a criteria upon which to deny the certificate. A finding of harassment, unlawful eviction, or arson, which are the current criteria, are determined after due process is given to the owner, and so the department can use these previous findings as a basis for the denial of the certificate without additional investigation or review. The agency's administrative issuance of an order to correct does not have the same due process history, which could, which could be problematic in terms of the owner's rights to challenging the finding. In addition, in the context of the pilot program, permitting a denial of the CONH without a hearing at oath for the issuance of an AEP administrative order to correct specifically is contradictory to the intent of the program. Existing criteria involving the addition of buildings in AEP to the pilot list is fashioned to qualify the building for the pilot after the building has been discharged to avoid any added delays or administrative hurdles to the owner completing the work required under the program, under the order. Regarding Intro 817, we will not be able to take a stance on that piece of legislation today. The administration is still reviewing and will work with council on clear follow-ups after the hearing. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I, along with my colleagues from FDNY and DOB, look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. Is there an administration representative that is going to read NYSEM's testimony? Matt? It's always Matt from City Hall. Okay. I just, again, I think this points, and this is not against any of the agencies who are present, but it just points to a little bit of chaos that is going on in City Hall, that we can't get all the agencies who have matters before the council to show up to hearing and speak on their own bills. That is disappointing and just really not a good look for our city. I'm gonna, Chair, if it's okay with you, I just want to ask one question. Sure. Turn it to you and our colleagues before I come back for a second round. Two questions. On Intro 751, good to see you, Chief Esposito. Understanding, of course, the concerns around fire personnel themselves, fighters themselves, issuing this information and carrying this information. Was there a conversation in the background within the administration, your sister agencies, about who could provide such information to the council or to the public?
Well, I think that guide is a good idea. I don't see it as being in the purview of the fire department handing out that. We don't handing out that information. We don't have it. I wasn't part of discussions about who would be the right party for that.
Okay. HPD? Was there any conversation about HPD personnel or possibly ARC being asked to carry this information and hand it out?
Thank you for the question, Chair. As you know, ARC does already distribute a lot of information to tenants when they respond to fires. Part of what they distribute now is the guide that Councilmember Gutierrez had put together some time ago, and most of the information that is being requested under that bill is part of that guide currently. So that is being handed out. And as you also know, but for the other members of the committee who may not, we worked with Councilmember Viles last year, as per her bill, to also work on a separate guide specifically for folks who are being displaced, which also was enhanced in conversation with the council member to include some of the information that is required under this new bill as well.
Great. And just for the public, can you remind us, when does ARC respond to a scene? Is there a contract that is governing HPD's relationship with ARC and ARC's work on the ground? And is the practice of distributing Councilmember Gutierrez's guide, is that a matter of policy that just changed internally, or is that in relation to something else?
Certainly. So the Department of Housing Preservation has a contract with the American Red Cross to respond to fires. It is also part of their mission to do so, and they do so across the country. But in coordination under this contract, they provide additional services. So they respond, they are on the listen for fires through the fire department, and they respond whenever there's believed to be a displacement. I don't believe they respond to like commercial fires and brush fires, but they respond to residential fires with offering services, including immediate emergency housing, as we've discussed. They do provide lots of information in addition to Councilmember Gutierrez's guide to tenants to the residents, which also includes information on referrals to other city agencies. They provide, financial assistance very short term for clients. Some of this is done pursuant to our contract, and some of it is done as part of their internal mission.
Thank you. What is the size of the contract that HPD has with ARC, and would you be able to share that contract with the council?
I believe we would be able to share it. Let me just see if I have here. It's a 5-year contract with a 1-year renewal option. I don't have the exact amount of the contract, but we can certainly provide that to the council.
Thank you so much. That was my first question. Just clarity on 751. Second question is related to vacate orders. So contributing to the confusion and honestly the exasperation that residents feel on the ground is unclarity about who is responsible for what. So can you share with us the breakdown of when is it that Department of Buildings issues a vacate order, when is it that HPD issues a vacate order, and how many vacate orders by agency has been issued, for instance, in the last year?
I guess I can start. So for HPD, generally our vacate orders are issued for maintenance issues, such as fire damaged walls, water damage caused by putting out the fire, and lack of essential services, right? So sometimes electricity is affected most seriously by fire, whether the fire happens in that area of the building or not. If a roof is missing and there's obviously damage inside the building, those issues, or if significant amount of windows and doors are broken in addition to fire damage within apartments, HPD vacate orders would be issued. In 2024, calendar year 2024, HPD issued overall 615 vacate orders. 334 of those were related to fire. Of those, 35 were full vacates, meaning the full building was vacated, and 299 were partial, meaning it could be as little as 1 unit or, some number of units in the building.
Thank you so much. And buildings?
From the Department of Buildings standpoint, we issue vacates when conditions are observed are imminently perilous, dangerous, or detrimental to life, public safety. And our building code has 6 specific instances where we would issue a vacate. Dangerous structural conditions, dangerous facade conditions, inadequate fire protection, inadequate egress, improper storage of hazardous, combustible, or toxic materials, or defective or unlawful gas work. In terms of number of vacates, in calendar year 2024, we issued 1,856 vacates. Of those, we have partially lifted 39, completely lifted 289. The breakdown for partial versus full, right now we currently have 485 full vacates in place and 1,030 partial vacates in place, again for calendar year 2024.
And council member, I'm sorry if I can add one additional thing. When we respond to a fire, our first option is to not vacate, right? The agency tries to do everything it can to ensure that conditions are restored as quickly as possible in order to avoid a vacate. So if the only issue, for example, is no electric to the building, working in coordination with NICEM and other agencies on the ground, DOB, Con Edison, or National Grid, the goal is to enable people to stay if the rest of the conditions are such that they don't pose an immediate threat.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. In DOB, how many of these open vacates, partial or full, how many of these are related to a fire?
don't have that breakdown, but I can certainly get it for you.
Got it. Thank you. And just to round out a question on, the immediate aftermath, fire is in there, looking out for the health and safety of people and looking at the structure, then buildings and HPD are coming in. How about in terms of the safety of the property? How is that coordinated, right? So once a fire has placed the building under control or the property under control, who is responsible for ensuring that the property owner protects their property, boards up the windows, has security if necessary, all of that?
Sure.
In terms of securing the property, until the owner can hire a contractor to seal the property, typically NYPD will remain on site in terms of a presence. If the owner is not available for implementing the seal of the property, the Department of Buildings will issue an immediate emergency declaration to have the property sealed.
And then HPD does the emergency work to seal the property?
Correct.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for those responses. I'll turn it over to Chair Ariola.
Thank you, Chair. So I would like to just note that NISM did send in testimony, agency testimony, but the agency does not fully address the oversight topic, which is part of the main topic here today. So I'm also disappointed because this is the Committee on Fire and Emergency Management, and I hope the administration is here listening. And when this committee meets, the agencies that answer to this committee should come, whether or not they believe they have the proper answers or it is pertaining to them. Because when we want to see who's going to be on the ground putting out, especially with Councilmember Gutierrez's bill, 751, it's like, who's going to be giving out the outreach? It would be NISM, and that's something that we need to know, because if I ask each and every one of you, how are you going to deal with outreach for displaced families, you're going to say, well, we'll work in conjunction with NISM and the Red Cross. And so I will certainly be in touch with Commissioner Zach Iskel on the fact that he ignored this invitation and didn't even send one person who would answer a question for us. That being said, Fire Department. FDNY procedures, what are your procedures for evacuating the scene of a structural fire?
So depending on the size and type of the building and the building construction and the severity of the fire, we may evacuate part of the building or the entire building. But during firefighting operations, the fire department would have control of that building for the safety of all the residents and the public. Keep them out, keep them away. Once the fire is out and under control, we would slowly turn that building back to the owner, the representative, again, depending on the size and type of the building. If we have structural issues with structural stability that were fire damage, we would notify DOB and eventually hand the building over either back to the owner or the NYPD.
Okay, and in what circumstances is an entire building evacuated? What would be a circumstance?
So it's highly dependent on the construction of the building. So a smaller private dwelling, clearly we would evacuate. If we had a fire in there, evacuate the entire building. The fire that we've spoken about, the fifth alarm on Wallace in the Bronx in January, the size of that building and the size of the fire, we evacuated that entire building. But it's also possible that we could have a fire on the 6th floor of a 6-story building and only evacuate that 6th floor and leave the other residents in. It depends on the severity of the fire, the amount of damage, the amount of water that's used. And in high-rise buildings that are fireproof or fire-protected construction, we may only evacuate individual apartments or a floor or two where the fire is and the fire above.
All right, and when a building is evacuated due to structural fire, who monitors the access to the scene and prevents unauthorized access to the building? Does the fire department have designated personnel at the scene of the fires to engage with the crowd for control efforts, or does that then go to another agency?
So during a fire, depending on the number of people, we set up, set up the tape, a restricted area, and if it's a large number or there are issues, we would notify the police department to come and enforce the restricted area.
And is that the same for DOB? Is that your process?
Typically, the Department of Buildings doesn't get involved when the building is being actively fought by FDNY. Once the fire is extinguished, then we will take over if there are structural issues with the building or egress issues with the building. If the owner is there.
I was talking about after evacuation. When it's, yeah, I know you're certainly not going to put the fire out, but certainly after evacuation, how does it work from there? Is there someone on site? Is there someone
Yes.
that you leave behind so that there isn't illegal access to the building where the people would be unsafe?
So once we're called to the fire, we have an emergency response team that operates 24/7, and will respond to FDNY or NISM's referral. We will, if the building is accessible, again, depending on the amount of damage, most buildings we can access. Sometimes we can't, though. If we can access, we will do an inspection. We will determine if any of those 6 conditions that I mentioned with regards to a vacate is present. We will implement the vacate order as necessary. In terms of security for the building, if the owner is present, we will ask them to secure the building. If necessary, hire their own private security in order to secure the building.
Okay, great. And HPD buildings, what is your process?
Thank you, Councilmember. Generally, we're at the tail end of this, so we're really just following through with whatever the other departments have already done in terms of that security issue.
And if you could just walk me through the coordination, among all of your agencies, from fire department and kick it to the buildings department, and then at the tail end we get HPD. So how does that work?
And again, depending on the size of the building and the significance of the fire, but I'll use the Wallace Avenue fire as an example again. So we were on scene for hours, with that fire, and as the fire starts to becomes under control, we will have an interagency meeting at the scene in the street. All the partner agencies will be represented. And we'll come up with the game plan of how we're going to, how the fire department is then going to turn the scene over to whether it's DOB or if our fire marshals need to investigate. And then for the next several days, we'll have meetings right there in the street a couple of times a day with HPD, with DOB, with NISM, and come up with our plan. On a smaller fire, again, taking a private dwelling, that just may be something right there with the owner of the building where we give control back over to the owner, and generally there's less of a need to to have buildings or buildings or HPD there to control the scene, or even the police department.
Yes, I've seen the coordination on the ground, and it really is a great coordination, and it really does then bring me back to my disappointment that NISM isn't here, because they were not just supposed to be here as part of the administration to like or not like the bills. This is an oversight hearing, and it's extremely disrespectful that they're not here, because they are part of the on-the-ground team. To what extent is access to apartments limited once the fire happens? We had a fire in my own district recently, high-rise co-op. two sister buildings, one went on fire, it was a complete vacate, and then, so how long after the complete vacate are people permitted to go back in and salvage whatever they can from the apartments? BDOB.
It wholly depends on the amount of damage that occurs in a building. But again, going back to the Wallace Avenue fire that's been referenced, that building had almost a complete roof collapse, and the 6th floor, because of that, was inaccessible. However, we were able to get tenants on the lower floors. The owner of the building implemented their own security. They were able to identify which tenants belonged in which units. We had the owner also have a professional engineer on site during that escort process to make sure that the tenants were safe. And of course, the security was escorting them as well. But again, these were implemented by the owner per our direction.
Thank you.
And that's for retrieval of belongings, specifically after a fire. And if we can get the folks in to get their immediate needs, whether that's medication, pets, we will certainly assist in any way we can. For Wallace Avenue, we had our Assistant Commissioner, Frank McCartan, there numerous days after the fire. We had our forensic engineers there as well. We were instrumental in implementing some pet rescues, having folks go in and retrieve the belongings as quickly as possible. But on the 6th floor, where the roof collapsed, that took a significant amount more time, especially because of the asbestos materials from the roof.
Right. And understandable, and thank you for that comprehensive answer, I appreciate it. Does HPD, DOB, or FDNY inform rent-regulated tenants that they should contact DHCR for a rent reduction when a vacate order is issued to their unit or building?
Thank you. Absolutely, HPD does. The American Red Cross does initially when someone comes in for emergency housing, but also when someone contacts our emergency housing services and they're registering for our services, we give them the form to file, or we direct them to the website. You can file on the website, I believe, for HCR. And this is certainly something that we highly encourage.
Good.
I would just add, to add in, we have information for tenants, a vacant order, that was put together by HPD and DOB, and that's specifically one of the questions on the flyer.
Perfect.
And that was via a council member Aviles' bill.
Correct.
From last year.
At this point, I'd just like to see if any of my colleagues have questions. Okay, Councilmember Gutierrez, Riley, and then Aviles, and we have been joined by Councilmember Schwan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chair Ariola, and thank you so much for your emphasis on the importance of having NYSEM here. Emergency is literally in the title of their agency, and so it's crucial that we have everybody here. So I just want to also thank you all for being here and engaging. I know from your testimony there are a ton of reservations, but thank you for being here and being a part of the conversation. Chief, can I ask, and I understood your sentiment in the testimony. I would love to get to a place where together we can collaborate and figure out what is the best way to distribute information. The guide for me is something that worked in District 34, right? We had a number of back-to-back fires. We see spikes every fall into winter, and it's very hard as a council member to get in communication with tenants, with victims, unless we show up to the scene of the fire, which is not necessarily safe all the time. And so the guide really came from a former staff member of mine who experienced a traumatic fire, and she was kind of picking up the pieces by herself and said, like, we should do something here. And it's been very useful. We distributed to all council offices. Every time there is a fire in my district, we're able to post it. If people reach out to us, we can distribute it. We had multiple conversations with Red Cross. They've also made a commitment to distribute it in the district. We want to see something more citywide because we do feel it's it's vital. We've heard from tenants who said, thank you, I didn't know where to go. So I guess my question to you is, in being mindful of everything you laid out in your testimony about what it takes, the cleaning up after, what is the best way to get information, maybe not a physical piece of paper, to whatever tenants are still around? A lot of them obviously are not able to stick around, but what is, in your opinion, the best way to give even something as small as a business card? When does that happen? It doesn't need to be FDNY, but when could that happen?
The idea of the guide, I think, is a very good idea. As we were preparing for this, I was thinking of, if I had a fire in my house, all of those questions you raised, I don't know the answer to. You know, what's available to you, and the insurance, and what government agencies. My hesitation is requiring that the fire department distribute it with all the equipment and everything we have on our rig. So a suggestion is, and you know, more and more we're getting away from paper and everything being digital. So if there were a website that was maintained, that would, you know, that everybody could go there and find all of this information. You know, most of the time we're seeing people with their phones, and everything's you know, a QR code or a website or some sort of application, or even, you know, an app for a phone that would give us all of this information. You know, is in my mind a suggestion.
So it's just the matter of, I guess, the time that FDNY is there, and kind of the steps afterwards. We do, I mean, there is an online component of this, obviously. As the tech chair, it'd be silly for me to say, let's just all do physical paper. But I think there are instances where maybe people do not have access, don't have a smartphone, don't have access to anything afterwards, and prefer having a physical piece of paper to be able to point to. And so I would love to just think a little bit more about kind of how we can produce that. And I appreciate the remark on the fire guide. It really was a labor of love, and you know, will continue to evolve, but it really came from victims in my own neighborhood. Average New Yorkers do not know who DOB is, who HPD is. I've heard from victims that oftentimes the most information they were able to get at the scene was from FDNY alone. They don't know who DOB is. Maybe they left by the time HPD came. Maybe they weren't there when Red Cross was there. They ran out. And so FDNY is kind of that agency that in a fire, I think for victims and tenants, that's who they know was there. And so that's kind of where that connection was made. So I just appreciate you being open to the conversation, and we'll keep talking.
Yeah. I think we can discuss further and come up with some ideas.
Thank you. Chair, can I just ask one more question? I know I'm like 30 seconds out. I wanted to ask a question to DOB regarding demolition applications. Can you just share with me what, you know, you said the financial documents weren't necessary for an approval, correct, of a demolition permit? Yeah.
Correct.
Can you share with me what you do need to approve a demolition permit?
In a normal demolition application, so not an emergency situation, the first step is to submit an application to the department, which includes the specific plans on how the demo is executed, the demolition is executed, floor by floor, area by area, very specific plans with very specific sequences. We have a team of plan examiners that reviews that application and those plans. Once those plans are approved, then the contractor for the owner needs to pull the permit. Included in there is specific items required that are necessary for pulling that permit, from rodent abatement to utility cutoffs to ACP5s, and making sure that asbestos abatement has been completed. There's a long list of items required depending on the situation.
Sure, thank you, and I'm sorry to interrupt. Is there a flag or something when an applicant is seeking a demolition permit while there already being a vacate order in place?
We have a flag on our property profile, a building information system, anytime we have a vacate order, whether that's partial or full. So that's publicly available right on the building information page that we have.
Okay, so part of the intention of this bill, and Chair Sanchez mentioned it, was, you know, it's not every landlord is a bad landlord. I've worked with landlords in my district that do want to bring tenants back, and are also frustrated by the bureaucracy. But there are some landlords whose intention is not to bring tenants back. And so we've seen a high percentage of these instances where landlords are sitting on these vacate orders, making no attempt to remediate, and then ultimately asking for demolitions. And you know, once that's in place, there's no pathway for these tenants. So what we're asking for is for greater barriers in these instances where they have to demonstrate that the demolition is absolutely necessary, and that they're demonstrating that they've tried, that they've been trying to make arrears. And I know, and again, I've spoken to landlords, I know that is a small percentage that does happen, but our concern is it often makes it so that some of these landlords are sitting on their hands waiting, making very little effort, and don't have to demonstrate that, and can just ask for a demolition because their building experienced a fire and there's a vacate order.
Understood, and be happy to work with you on that.
Thank you. I have another question, but I'll wait for round two. Thank you so much, Cheers.
And apologies if I missed it. I just wanted to follow up on Councilmember Gutierrez's last question. Are there special protocols or considerations that DOB takes into account when the building has rent-regulated units in it, in terms of a demolition request? I'd like to welcome back my co-pilot to the hearing. She's with us at the budget hearing. Yeah. We'll just need to swear you in, Deputy Commissioner.
Please raise your right hand. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and to answer all councilmember questions honestly?
I do.
Thank you.
Just wanted to speak a little bit to what Councilmember Gutierrez was raising. So one of the concerns with the legislation is that our permits are as of right, so we don't have discretion whether to issue them or not. So just because there was a fire, that wouldn't be a reason for us to withhold a permit. But then speaking to the chair's last question, there isn't, because there was a fire, that wouldn't be a reason for us to withhold a permit. But then speaking to the chair's last question, there isn't specific protocols at DOB, but to the extent a building with rent regulation.
Got it. And before?
That we do check for. Yeah.
Okay. And do you have an understanding of what DHCR considers in their approval?
I can get back to you with that. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I'd now like to call Councilmember Riley.
Thank you, Chair Sanchez. First, I want to start with HPD. HPD, could you tell us how many violations did 2910 Wallace Avenue have prior to that fire?
Thank you for the question, Council Member. We didn't come with any specific building information today, but certainly we can provide that.
Give an estimate. Was it a lot?
I don't believe it was a high number of violations.
Okay.
My recollection.
Okay. It was fairly a good amount of violations that residents have been complaining about for years. I fortunately got this part in my district last year, and residents said that they were complaining for over a decade regarding this building. So it was a lot of violations, which led to the displacement of some tenants who are here joining us today that took their time out to join us to make sure that they testify. So how would HPD's operation change if Reso 802 and the underlying state legislations were enacted?
I don't believe that we're prepared to comment on resolutions at hearings, Council Member, but certainly the administration can circle back with you.
So you don't have no feelings? You
I do
don't
not.
think landlords should be responsible if they are responsible for negligence, that they should take care of displaced tenants?
HPD doesn't determine negligence, and I'm not sure if that is a...
Does anybody on this panel determine negligence? No?
Not in relation to fires.
All right.
We don't make a determination about... We don't do the investigation on fire.
It's not good, yeah. Okay. DOB, does DOB currently require landlords to notify displaced tenants once repairs are completed?
The question was whether the owner of the building notifies the tenants?
Yes, currently.
We don't have any requirements to that effect.
So would you support provisions of Reso 802?
We're not prepared to comment on resolutions.
Okay. Okay. It's really disheartening. I've been dealing with this fire, for those who don't know. Wallace Avenue fire has took place in January. We have tenants who are still displaced now. We had a meeting with the developer, who was Park Cash, and they haven't been doing a good job with notifying the tenants of any repairs, and tenants are currently right now disabled, not able to go inside the building, according to them. They're misplaced certain of the tenants' properties. So there's a lot going on within the Wallace Avenue fire. So I understand you guys don't have the opportunity or the capacity to discuss resolutions, but these are real issues that are going on with real people that are actually here today. So I think it's very important for us to continue this conversation and see how we can actually help them, because currently, as of today, we haven't been helping them to the magnitude that we should be. So, Chair, thank you so much for the opportunity for questions, but it doesn't look like anyone has any answers.
Thank you, Councilmember Riley. I just want to follow up on Councilmember Riley's question. So yes, you know, state laws, and you don't want to comment on the resolution, but you can comment on your existing practices, right? We have here from HPD's own website, HPD is authorized to seek reimbursement for relocation services provided to displaced tenants when the underlying conditions necessitating the relocation were caused by negligent or intentional acts of the building owners. So who determines those negligent or intentional acts, if they were negligent or intentional?
And again, you know, it would have to be a determination. I'm not sure if it's a fire department investigation, if it's a police department investigation. HPD is not, you know, we don't make a determination on the cause of fire. That's not part of our agency's role.
So how often, if ever, it sounds like maybe never, but how often does HPD seek reimbursement, or has HPD sought reimbursement for relocation services?
We do, in terms of when, for example, HPD issues a habitability vacate, a vacate around not fire, again, because we don't determine the cause of a fire. But if the cause of the vacate is, you know, the owner is not providing electric, the owner has not provided heat, the owner is not providing water, the owner has allowed the condition of the building to be such that, you know, the walls are crumbling, we do issue a small number relative to other vacates, but we do issue vacates on that issue regularly, and we do issue vacates for illegal occupancy, which is also something that we determine.
Thank you. That makes sense. Chief, in the fire department, do the fire marshals look into culpability or negligence in their investigation?
The fire marshals are tasked with determining the cause and origin of the fire. I don't believe that they then go the next step and determine whether that's negligent or intentional, or make some sort of you know, notification. But they are able to start that step, find the cause of it, and I would imagine that then that puts something else in motion.
Thank you, Chief. And back to HPD, do you have numbers for how many, you know, how often HPD has gone to seek to recoup expenses that HPD incurred because of an owner who was found to be at cause?
We can certainly provide that information to you. I don't have that today, Council Member. Excuse me, just also in reference to 2910, I know that our intergovernmental office continues to be in touch with elected officials who has been working with the tenants. We continue to try and be in touch with the tenants. A lot of tenants continue to call our emergency housing services. The owner is continuing to work on asbestos and the roof issues at the building, and we will continue that dialogue with those parties.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner, and thank you for being here when you don't feel well, and you're still here and you're still present. I appreciate you. Councilmember Aviles, I'll turn it to you, and then back to Councilmember Gutierrez for second round.
Great, thank you so
I'm
much.
sorry,
Chair.
and I just want to acknowledge that Councilmember Felice is here.
Oh, great. Thank you so much, chairs. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. In terms of, I guess along the lines of the questioning that you've just engaged in, obviously this issue of prolonging repairs or not doing any repairs at all on a building that has been vacated, what we're seeing is pretty long periods of time where the city is paying for people to be in emergency shelter. It seems to be that number continues to increase. So what kind of guardrails, and forgive me if you had this in your testimony because I was not here for the earlier portion, but what kind of guardrails are being put into place to ensure that landlords are engaging in like reasonable good faith repair efforts on their buildings to get tenants back? Because the city is paying an exorbitant amount, and unfortunately I have a good deal of landlords who in my first year, I'm in year 4, I don't think any of those tenants have been able to return.
Thank you, Councilmember. I will speak for HPD and related, specifically to HPD vacates. With relation to fire, after HPD issues a vacate, in most buildings where 6 units or more have been vacated, HPD does follow up with inspections. Follows up with the owner to ensure that things are moving forward. In some cases, we do initiate litigation on properties. That litigation does take time, unfortunately. For example, we do have litigation against 1420 Noble Avenue, which is a previous large fire in the Bronx, also where the entire building is still vacated. We have received 1 round of civil penalties, but that case continues against that property owner. We have had cases where we've brought litigation and tenants have returned. There was one down in Lower Manhattan, and we can certainly provide you with some examples. We work as hard as we can to return tenants to their previous housing. We can't do that in all cases. There are a lot of vacates where there's just 1 unit or 2 units, and it's impossible for HPD to follow up on all of them. But certainly if you have examples of buildings where you have a number of tenants who were vacated, especially if those tenants are receiving emergency housing services, so they're housed through our agency's housing, we do follow up with those for that very reason. Right, our goal is to get households, families back into their homes.
And what is the threshold that's being used to decide whether or not you're going to litigate an issue?
Generally, it's the responsiveness of the owner and the numbers of households that we're serving.
How do you determine responsiveness? Like, it feels like that could be all over the place.
Yeah, well, we have community coordinators who reach out to owners. We do inspections at buildings to see if work is moving forward or not. And again, if there are specific examples, we can see if that is a building that we are monitoring.
And how long, as you said, it takes time? Obviously, everything with courts take time. What are we talking about in terms of how long before HPD would start a litigation process?
It depends on, again, how quickly the owner is moving, how much damage there is to the building, whether the owner is claiming complicating factors, insurance issues, whether they filed with the Department of Buildings to show that they're moving forward. Okay. It really depends on the extent of the damage and what was necessary.
Great. I'll follow up with you. Thank you. In terms of DOB, what kind of guardrails are, I'm sorry, I'm looking at you, but I meant you, both of y'all. What kind of guardrails are you putting in place to ensure landlords are actually responding and making good faith efforts? And this notion of notification is a serious one. People get dispersed, they move out of emergency housing, they're couch surfing, and never get notified that they can return to their places. So if you could talk to me about notification and also what guardrails DOB is putting into place.
In terms of follow-up after a fire, we will issue commissioner's orders or DOB violations with specific timeframes on when those repairs need to be implemented, when they need to hire a registered design professional or RDP, when do they need to submit the applications to us for the repairs, timeframes on the permits, and then timeframe for the repairs. Specifically, I know we're referencing 2910 Wallace. We implemented those DOB orders. The owner hired their own security, hired their own professionals. We were there for weeks at a time, making sure that the owner was in good faith, doing what they could to get the tenants back in to retrieve belongings. We continue working with the owner's professionals and making sure that the applications are meeting our requirements, and having those conversations and making sure that the work is proceeding per the commissioner's orders that we issued.
And I'll add just similar to HPD, if we do not receive any contact from such owners after DOB violation is, or DOB order is sent, then we could follow up with enforcement action, whether that be an oath violation for failure to comply, a criminal court summons, or in conjunction with the law department, some sort of affirmative litigation.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, I follow rules. Thank you so much. I just had a couple of follow-ups. Can I ask, and this is for everybody, because the intent of the portal is to not just provide orientation for tenants, but for homeowners who are also, like, in many ways falling to predatory practices, to be able to get a response from like DP or DOB, for example. I had a homeowner who experienced a very traumatic fire a year and a half ago, and I've been meeting with them, and they desperately want to get their tenants back in the building, but have had to hire like legal representation that they don't love just because they can't get responses from agencies. So can I just get a sense from every agency that's here, after a fire, after, let's say, there's a vacate order, tenants have been removed from the dwelling, is there communication between the agencies, and is there like a central location where you all know, okay, FDNY has spoken to DOB, or is there a place for you to is there something that exists for you to know how other agencies are speaking about this particular fire? And would that be helpful?
For the fire department, we have access to DOB's the BIS, so we're able to see
that they've been in the building.
We're able to see the DOB actions on it. But generally, after a fire, the fire department doesn't issue the vacate. Generally, it's a structural stability issue. If there's a vacate, DOB will, will issue it. Once the fire marshal investigation, if there is one, is complete, that usually finishes the fire department's involvement.
You don't have to come back.
We generally, after maybe a day, generally we would not be back once the investigation is complete.
Mm-hmm. And then for DOB and HPD, for example, do you all need to keep talking?
In terms of department buildings, we work with the owners, professionals, whether that's an architect or an engineer, professional engineer, making sure the applications for the repairs are coming in, and making sure that that they are proceeding with the work. If not, we could go with enhanced enforcements, like the Assistant Commissioner said.
And in that exchange, at any point, are tenants trying to communicate with DOB about whether or not the timeline, the status, and can you make that information available to the tenants?
We have a specific office for Office of Tenant Advocate. They have communications with tenants very specifically, and if there's any questions on the process or or how to lift the vacate or how to deal with any of those situations, that office is specifically there for tenants.
In that office, if a tenant is wondering if they could go back into their apartment or just curious if their landlord is, present, that information can be shared by this particular unit?
Correct.
Okay. And then what about HPD?
I have two kind of answers to your question. One is tenants, going back to homeowners first. Information about how to have the vacate rescinded is available on our website. When we post the vacate, there is a QR code there that will take either a tenant or an owner to the same page, which is our vacate page, and it will list out who they can contact to find out more information about how to lift the vacate. Our vacates are online, so an owner can see what the reasons for the vacate were. Recently, we've made an update to our website, so for those of you who use HPD Online, right, you put in the building address and you can bring up a whole lot of HPD information about a building. One piece of information you can look at is the vacate and the vacate order itself. Recently, we modified that because there are occasions where we do partial rescinds. So we would issue a vacate for 6 units in the building, for example, out of 20. 3 of those units would be restored to habitability, and 3 are still being worked on. We now post information to say the vacate has been rescinded for these 3 units. These 3 units still have a vacate that's fully accessible to owners and tenants.
And that's updated on the website. But is there direct communication with the tenants of that building?
If we have information to connect with them, right? Part of what we try to do is encourage, at the very start, encourage tenants to register with emergency housing services, whether they need housing or not. Because if we have contact information for them, we will attempt to reach out to them. A lot of times they don't register with us, and there's no way for us to communicate with those tenants.
My final question. Do you all think having one central location, and there's other agencies that I think can also be involved in a fire that are not here. DP, I know, is one of them. I get calls oftentimes from homeowners that need assistance to get the water turned off, Is having a central location, a portal, helpful in the way that you all communicate to one another to assist the tenants and the homeowners and just assist the job that you are all doing? Is something like a portal helpful to that in an instance of an emergency and a fire? Obviously, every situation is different. There could be other agencies that are not here today, but is that something that you all would support?
I think, personally, a portal is very hard to coordinate. The different agencies work at different paces. We have different milestones that we're trying to meet. We have different staff that may be speaking with an owner or a tenant. I think in terms of HPD and DOB, who's our most common, there are most commonly cases where both an HPD and a DOB vacate are issued, is that our HPD staff know to check Department of Buildings to see if there's an open vacate and advise an owner or a tenant that they also need to be aware of that vacate and to tell them you need to file your plans and permits with DOB based on whatever's on that vacate. So I think our communication with owners and tenants is fairly straightforward and easiest if it's directly with the party. Again, we would reach out to tenants if we had contact information.
But tenants and homeowners alike have to know to seek that information as opposed to having it all live in one location. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you, chairs. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Just a quick follow-up to that. That moment where you lose people, where they're in trauma and they don't wait around for something. Is there a way that you could compel the landlord? Landlords are collecting rent from somebody. They have the contact information. Is there a way to compel that we make sure we get who's living in those buildings to make sure we don't lose them in this kind of moment of trauma? Or that they're not at home and they come back later, nobody's there, right? Like, has the agencies considered that as another way to make sure that we get access to the tenants who were in those buildings?
I think one of the things that we've done, and I believe buildings has as well, is the vacate order itself now does have a QR code that takes them to that pamphlet that we worked with your office on, and that does provide them hopefully all of the contact information they need in order to, even if in that moment of trauma they didn't register with the HS, they didn't take ARC information, brings them back to that place where they can start that process. In larger fires especially, we do ask the owners for tenant information. So I think we make sure that all of the households are accounted for, that anyone registering for services, knows that we know that they are maybe come to us for services. But sometimes not everybody in the household is on that.
Sure. I know
Register.
that, I'm sure that's a real problem, and I have a specific instance of that in my district where there was a fire. But in terms of, when you say larger, is there a threshold limit that we're talking about? Is it 50 units? Is there?
I would have to get back to you,
Okay,
Councilmember, if
thank you.
there's a hard.
Thank you, Chairs.
Great, thank you. My co-chair just stepped out for a moment. Okay, I have a lot of questions. Now that my colleagues, you're good? Sure. Now that my colleagues are done, I just want to pick up where we left off on negligence and seeking reimbursements. Deputy Commissioner for HPD, can you walk us through what is HPD's process when you do determine that you can seek reimbursement? How do you go about that? Is that through the courts? Is that through an agency request?
Recent legislation, and I couldn't tell you what year, enables us to bill it through the Department of Finance. In the past, it was through the court where there would be a filing once all expenses had been incurred.
Thank you. And that was city legislation?
I believe so, yes.
Cool. I didn't know we could do that. Okay. Okay, but then again, that is when HPD is determining that the owner is at fault for the vacate, not anything to do with determining who's at cause for the fire, but specifically the vacate order.
That's correct. And the basis for, in some cases, the vacate order is the fire.
Okay, thank you. Now focusing in on the resident experience. I mean, you know that we have all, I feel like you guys are family at this point. We've been through maybe 20 fires in District 14, not to mention all of the others. Just a couple weeks ago, we had our fire on Burnside, and we're all on the ground together. I'm that small person shadowing you all and asking many questions, and thank you for all the answers. But focusing in on the resident experience, can we start there? Residents are on the sidewalk. It is a fire that is resulting in displacement. Can you walk us through, for the American Red Cross HPD, what is you mentioned a little bit about some of the resources that are offered, but in what instances are hotels offered, and for how long, and what cases are those hotel stays extended, and in what cases is financial assistance provided?
Sure, thank you, Council Member. Often on the ground of large events, emergency management is also present and helps coordinate ARC and their response. Determining whether or not we can service everyone at the site of the event or whether other locations might be needed to handle that. The American Red Cross will immediately offer emergency housing if the household has nowhere to go. Their process is to find, hotels, commercial hotels basically, that have availability. Obviously, these are unpredictable events, and there's no telling on any given day what that availability might be at any of the hotels that they partner with. So they do their best to find locations. Within 2 to 3 days, the expectation, after ARC has communicated again, not just at the site, but has done additional outreach to the household, is that they begin the registration process with HPD's, Emergency Housing Services, and that is really to register the basic amount of proof that, if you want to call it that a family needs to provide, is that they were living at the building, and we work with the household to determine what that is. It could be an ID card, it could be a letter from a school, it could be any number of online bills that people pay, understanding that they may not have access.
Thank you. How many hotels does HPD contract with across the city, let's say per borough, to be able to offer these emergency hotel stays?
HPD does not contract with any hotels.
Okay.
And ARC does not contract with the hotels. This is an on-as-needed basis.
So what determines, for instance, and I know Councilmember Riley can relate to this, there have been so many fires where we have constituents sent to Staten Island, sent to Brooklyn, knowing that there are existing hotels in the borough. Maybe they're full, maybe they have space. In many instances, residents will come to us and say, well, I want to stay here, and they call them, they have space. What determines whether or not they're placed in such hotels?
And this is really, ARC doesn't have a relationship with every hotel. Not every hotel is interested in participating in this program. This is ARC's relationship with these facilities and their availability of location.
So there's nothing statutory, contractual that is limiting where residents can be placed, displaced people can be placed?
That first emergency housing, a few days, is really the goal, is to get temporary location for the families, for the household to stay. And we and ARC do their very best to do that as quickly and efficiently as possible.
Okay. I have specifically been told we have no hotels in the Bronx. And so I just want to make sure that I'm understanding correctly from you, Deputy Commissioner, that there are no hotels to be had. These are just relationships and calls that ARC makes, trying to get hotels to accept displaced residents in their facilities.
Yeah, that is correct.
Okay. And so if a council member or other community folks are able to help locate for that immediate aftermath, if we're able to help locate a hotel that is willing to take the resident, then ARC is able to.
I think we would need to circle back with the American Red Cross, because they have certain protocols about locations that they can use. They have to arrange for billing and payment. So I'm not sure that it's as simple as what you're suggesting. But we can certainly circle back with the American Red Cross about that.
Thank you. And how does billing and payment work for those hotels?
That, again, that's a matter between the ARC and the hotel. I don't believe, right?
We'll just have to swear you in.
Sure. Assistant Commissioner Kim to join me for this.
Hello, Assistant Commissioner Kim.
Please raise your right hand. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and to answer all council member questions honestly?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Could you repeat the question again?
How does billing and payment work for the hotels that are providing residents with a place to stay?
So ARC, they will send us a bill. So the contract works as a reimbursement. So they'll send us a bill for the hoteling that was used to provide sheltering for the households.
And then HPD pays ARC, ARC pays the hotel?
Correct.
How timely are these payments from HPD to ARC?
We do use like the passport system for all billing and payments. So we follow the regular contracting and procurement rules.
Are there any current delays in payments owed to ARC?
I would have to look into that, but I'm not aware of any.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so continuing the resident experience, they have now they've registered with ARC, they have been placed in a hotel, day 2 is here, and they're being told they have to leave. What is their experience? Who are they speaking to at Emergency Housing Services? What are the roles of the staff at EHS? Titles, roles.
So they shouldn't be being told that they have to leave. They should be being advised by the American Red Cross to contact the Emergency Housing Services to register for additional services, right, beyond that initial period. Again, once the household contacts us, our goal is to work with them to get the documentation we need to show that they're eligible for services. And our team works very extensively with households to try and obtain that documentation. And I went through some of the examples of the type of documentation we can accept.
What are the titles and roles of the emergency housing staff? Are these social workers? Are these case managers? What are their titles?
At this point, they're intake specialists, right? They're really just trying to qualify the family. They're not doing case management at that moment.
And can you give us a rundown of what they are trying to qualify the families for?
Again, just to confirm that they are a household from that location, that was residing at that location.
Sure, thank you. So what happens? What services or connections does EHS provide, EHS staff provide for these families?
So they can provide various, once the intake is complete, and the family is then going to be assigned to either a family living center, or if they're an adult household, to one of our single room occupancy locations. Once the family moves to that setting, whichever it is, then they receive a different suite of services, right? So the family living centers include more family-oriented services, includes Department of Education. There are caseworkers at those locations to assist the families. The adult households obviously don't need that Department of Education component. They are assigned a caseworker that works for HPD at the family living centers. The caseworkers work for the family living center. The family living center is a contracted organization, nonprofit, that has their own staff to assist the families.
So these are not facilities that are owned or managed by the city. They're facilities that you contract nonprofits to run.
Yes, we own one property, but we do not run the facilities. We contract and are actually in the process of renewing contracts for those facilities now.
Got it. What are some examples of the providers that run these facilities?
Help USA. Right?
I thought you said help.
No,
Help,
I'm sorry.
Assistant Commissioner
I'm
Kim.
sorry about that. Help USA runs one facility, Acacia runs a facility, and the West Harlem Group Assistance runs a facility.
Sorry, what was that last one?
West Harlem Group Assistance.
Thank you. To follow up on Councilmember Aviles' question, HPD asked for tenant information from the landlord in larger fires. Just want to make sure, I know you said you don't have that information today, just want to make sure that you provide us with what is that threshold. But a follow-up question is, why not always ask for resident information?
Do you know?
Well, the households would have to initiate that they want to register with HPD and request services. In many cases, some households are not seeking services from HPD. So they would first receive the assistance from the Red Cross, and if they want to register with HPD, they would call the hotline.
But that's inconsistent. That's saying that HPD is only going to speak with families who want services, and yet you do request all information in cases of large fires. That's inconsistent. So why don't we just always ask?
I think in the larger fires, it's really a matter of the practicality of coordinating everybody on the ground and getting the families to move through very quickly to know that they were residing at the building. We don't have that kind of presence at every fire. But you are present at every fire where there is a vacate issue? At the point we issue the vacate, but HPD doesn't respond to the fire. So HPD may be going to issue the vacate the next day or 2 days later. We do not, we don't respond, for example, to 1 and 2 family home fires.
Because our first responders do.
For the most part.
So why doesn't HPD ask for information for units where they've issued a vacate?
I can go back and talk with our special enforcement unit about whether or not that is the case. It's not to my knowledge at this time.
Okay. I of course am getting at with this line of questioning that you should ask, right? You should be able to have this information in as least burdensome a way to tenants as possible, because leaving it to residents who don't know what HPD is, don't know that you exist, don't know that ARC is a possibility, don't know who issues what. it's just another barrier to getting back on their feet after they've been displaced.
Understood. And again, ARC does respond to every fire, so they are leaving information for the tenant. If the tenant isn't home when they go, they do leave a sticker to ask the tenant to contact them. So at some point in the process, all tenants, affected by these fires should be aware that ARC is the front door, really, to the services that we provide.
Got it. Thank you. Now a couple of numbers questions. Emergency housing service shelters hosted more than 476 single adults and 500 families in fiscal year 2024, including 300 families with children. These stays lasted on average 592 days for single adults and 337 days for families with children. This is the long haul. This is information that we obtain through city limits, and city limits obtained from you all, because there's no information really on emergency housing services work on HPD's website. There's only 2 sentences that describe the program. And so there's just a large delta, a large gap here in information. So you spoke about the process for a displaced household, but in terms of the numbers, how many, and this might be DOB and HPD tag teaming the answer to this question, how many units, how many households, say in fiscal year 24, had vacate orders issued and needed or could not stay in their homes, versus how many were served by ARC versus how many eventually were housed within EHS shelters? Our goal is to understand the gap between how many folks are facing displacement versus receiving ARC services, receiving EHS services.
Okay, I'm gonna start with the website issue, council member. So recently, Emergency Housing Services was placed into my portfolio. I was not aware even that there was an Emergency Housing Services page, because there is a page on vacates that has much more information about emergency housing services. And so we appreciate you bringing that to our attention so we can combine or redistribute the information on those web pages to make that more clear to the public. In terms of the vacates to the households that come into ARC to the resins, I think it's very difficult to draw that line directly. I can certainly tell you in terms of HPD vacates, and I don't know if we're just still talking about just fires or we're talking about all, but we can certainly provide you with information on how many vacates. I believe our open data provides information on HPD vacates, including the number of units vacated and the general reason for the vacate. So we can certainly break that down for you. And then in terms of emergency housing services, the number of households that come in from fires versus other types of vacates. That will take us a little time to put together, but that's information that can be available.
Okay, thank you. I know I get an email. ARC is amazing. They send us a lot of information after every fire where they're present, and they tell us how many families were served. So it'd be great to have all that information in one place. Where are HPD emergency housing shelters?
So our family living centers are in the Bronx, Manhattan, and Brooklyn. And we have single room occupancy availability in the Bronx, Manhattan, and Queens.
And what determines where families are placed who need longer term support?
There are a number of factors that go into that. Certainly, we try to consider the location that the family is coming from, but there are certain special needs or the size of the family or other extenuating circumstances that may require one over the other as an option.
Thank you. What are the funding sources for emergency housing services?
I believe we have a number of funding sources, right? We do receive some federal funding through CDBG. We receive some city tax levy as well for that. And for, I think, the one facility that we do own, we do receive some capital for repairs there.
City capital?
I believe so.
How much federal funding is?
I don't know that we brought that breakdown, but we can certainly provide that.
And how many facilities? I'm sorry if I
Again, we have 3 family living centers.
And how many SROs?
14, those are not ours, right? Those are privately owned property.
Okay. What is emergency housing services, because you mentioned there are case managers, what is their relationship to Department of Building and HPD enforcement staff? Are they receiving information about vacates, curing of conditions, when people can go back home?
When an HP, excuse me one second. Can I have some more water? When an HPD vacate is rescinded, HPD's Special Enforcement Unit does notify EHS that the apartment or the unit is ready to be reoccupied. So that does happen. We notify the owner that we're notifying the tenant. We notify EHS, again, if the tenant is receiving EHS services, and EHS notifies the tenant.
Does HPD or DOB require the owner to prove that they have told communicated this information to tenants when they can go back home?
HPD does notify the owner that they are required to do that, and generally we hear directly from the tenant if they are not being allowed to go back home. And we did recently have a case where we needed to work with the owner to ensure that the tenant was restored.
But is there any way in which HPD or Department of Buildings is is confirming with the owner? Did you tell them? Did you tell them they can go back home?
I will check with our Special Enforcement Unit if we receive some kind of confirmation back from the landlord.
DOB?
Yeah, I don't think there's any specific requirement, but again, we do have the Office of Tenant Advocate. If the tenants reach out, we will gladly give them the information, or it's publicly available again on our BIS page.
Okay, because this is something that I've heard time and again from residents. We didn't know we could go back in. We don't know what's going on. There's just a general amount of concern around not having the information that would help them stabilize themselves again. A quick follow-up on the numbers that you shared around vacate orders for HPD and DOB. Do you have the number of units associated with those vacate orders, not just property numbers?
For HPD, fire-only vacates, we have approximately 11, for calendar year 2024, I gave you the numbers, right? We had 341 units affected by full fire vacates and 721 units affected by partials.
Got it. Units. And Department of Buildings, you mentioned 1,656 vacates, 39 partially lifted, 289 completely lifted, 45 full vacates, and 130 partials that are still active. Do you know how many, are those property numbers or unit numbers?
Those are property numbers or number of buildings.
Okay. And do you have the number of units affected?
I don't have it here. I think we could determine that number. Some of our vacates are not related to occupancy or number of units. A lot of our vacates are for rear yards, side yards that do not impact occupancy. And we can also break down how many of those vacates are for fires, but I believe the large majority of our vacates are for actually compromised egress related to illegal occupancy.
Got it. Okay, thank you. I should have asked this when I was asking about all of the what information is told to residents about whether they can go back in. Before you rescind a vacate order, that would be a moment in time in which you could require that the landlord or the owner prove to you that they've communicated to residents, but that question is not asked in the rescinding of vacate orders in either agency?
I don't know that we would ask that before the rescind because we wouldn't want the landlord to notify the tenant before the rescind. We would want the landlord to notify the tenant at the time of the rescind or after the rescind is issued. So again, I can go back and I'll speak with our special enforcement unit about that exact communication and how that happens, and we can provide that information to you.
Yeah. Look, 10 years of working with HPD, I'm not trying to put it on your lap or your responsibility, but for both agencies, it would be helpful if there was a way that we were confirming that the landlords and the owners are telling the residents what they need to know. Okay. In relation to Intro 750, DOB, you testified regarding your concerns about changing the amount of time that landlords have to correct violations for more than 6 months. Can you tell us how many DOB issued violations remain uncorrected for more than 6 months? And what enforcement actions are currently used by the agency? And then I just have one more.
Sure. A couple of things to unpack there, but speaking of just the major and the lesser violations, we have 3 categories or 3 classifications for summonses. One of them is Class 1, which is immediately hazardous, must be corrected forthwith. So the Class 2 and Class 3 are major hazards, some threat to public safety. So for 2023, we issued Class 2 violations, 24,749. And of those that were not dismissed, which are 22,831, approximately 46% were corrected within 6 months. And in 2024, which is still not over, so we're still counting that number, 29,367 were issued. Of those, 27,826 were not dismissed, and about 37.8% have been corrected within the first 6 months, but we're still, again, we're not 6 months from December yet, or November. For Class 3 violations issued in 2023, which are the most low-level types of charges, we issued 2,076 summonses, 1,840 were not dismissed, and approximately 42.83% were corrected within 6 months. And in 2024, we issued 2,346, about 2,100 were not dismissed, and approximately 34.79 were corrected within 6 months.
Did you share the numbers for Class 1?
For Class 1s, I do have that number. This legislation would impact 2s and 3s, which is why I focused on that. But for Class 1s, let me see here.
Because Class 1s are already required to be corrected within
30 days,
30
correct.
days, yeah.
Or well, actually forthwith, so immediately. So it should really be second day. But after 30 days, respondents could be subject to an additional civil penalty for failure to correct. For Class 1s in 2023, let's just make sure. Total summonses total summonses excluding dismissals were at 14,229, and about 48% were corrected within 6 months. And for 2024, we have 17,926 excluding dismissals, and about 41.83% were corrected within 6 months, which again, still not done with the full count since we're still waiting for November and December.
I'm a lay person, but it seems to me like over all classes, it sounds like consistently half are corrected within 6 months. What is the agency's position on this rate?
I don't think we have a position per se. We do what we can in order to get correction as quickly as possible. But whether that number is a success or not, ideally we would love it for it to be corrected earlier, but we understand that respondents do have to take some time in order to file the permits, get the right contractors, and file that certificate of correction and get it approved.
My last question, I'd like to acknowledge that we've been joined by Councilmember Ressler. Okay, I'm not gonna say it. On intro 817, HPD, does the city have any information on how many New Yorkers have renter's insurance? Is this something that's asked in the housing vacancy survey?
Not to my knowledge. Again, I'm not the expert on the housing vacancy survey, so.
Okay. It should be. It's really important. Okay. That concludes my questions. Councilmember Ressler with questions.
Thank you very much, Chair. Always good to see you. Just a couple questions. I think in the spirit of some of these bills, especially want to just recognize the leadership of Councilmember Gutierrez and in leading on a really smart and important package here. When we have fires in our district, it's incredibly challenging to get in contact with the constituents who are impacted, provide support, and engage. And I just wonder, Deputy Commissioner Santiago, if you have advice for us or others on what recommendations would you share with our offices for how we can provide the best assistance in real time to constituents who are displaced by fire?
That is a good question, Council Member, that I have to admit that I have not given much thought to previously. Certainly something we can go back and think about in terms of what support council members can provide. I know that at major events, many of you actually show up at the event and offer, the services that your office has available for your constituents. We can't all be everywhere for every fire, and that's really the challenge.
I think that's exactly it. Councilmember Sanchez has had Chair Sanchez, has had a number of tragedies in her district over these 3+ years in office, and how she has shown up on the ground day after day for people who've been impacted has been really inspiring, and I think a model for what council leadership should look like, council representation, I should say, should look like. But it is hard to be in all places at all times, and when fires occur at 3 o'clock in the morning, sometimes we don't even know about it until people have already been relocated. And it's, sometimes people take advantage of Red Cross services and there's opportunities for connections there, but we have abilities to set up GoFundMes to maximize resources and support and from our communities. We may even have housing solutions that we can help identify if we are in direct communication and contact. And it's like very much catch as catch can, and we don't have a good mechanism for facilitating those referrals or relationships so that we can step in and then champion the needs of our constituents who have been impacted. And I think, we all wish we could be Purina Sanchez, but I think that council members really do want to step in those moments of crisis, as well as and effectively as she has done, to be there. And I think if there were ways that agencies could really set us up to create those warm handoffs for us, I don't know if others want to jump in here to help. I know that you think about the world, Deputy Commissioner Santiago, from the perspective of tenants and making sure that they have access to the resources and support that they need. But if others want to jump in with any suggestions for what we could or should do, or how you can create a better, activate council members to support constituents in need, I would welcome any suggestions that you all would like to share, or if you'd like to come back to us.
Thank you.
We can certainly come back to you and have that discussion, absolutely.
Because I think that, I don't know if they're privacy issues or what, but I feel like having a part of our protocol be sharing of contact information with council offices for people who have been displaced by fire who in our district, or displaced by emergency in our district, should be a standard protocol. And let us jump in and help. So I think it can often be really frustrating to navigate city agencies and city bureaucracy, and especially when you've lost your own identification or different pieces of critical information. You need us, right? I mean, that's what we do well, is that we force city agencies to listen and act and move. And but we can only do that if we're actually in direct communication with the people who are impacted. So I hope that there are ways that we can improve that coordination, because I don't think it's as good as it should be. And you know, like I said, I think Chair Sanchez has been the model and done a terrific job. Councilmember Gutierrez also has done a terrific job, but I think it's hard, and it shouldn't be as hard to make happen. So I'll leave it there. But thank you very much for the opportunity, Chair Sanchez.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Ressler. And yeah, just to reiterate, you know, what ends up happening, especially in the bigger fires, as you know, is residents get asked the same question over and over and over. They register with ARC, then they get asked their contact information from us, and then, you know, they go and register with EHS, right? And so just like when we all do case management and case services, being able to minimize that and just be more efficient for folks who just potentially lost everything would go a long way. So that concludes our questions. I once again, you know, want to, you know, just express the disappointment that NISM isn't here, not to knock the great work that they do, because they are on the ground when there are 3-alarm fires and above, and many other kinds of emergencies. And when we call, they also come and they help with coordination. But being able to hear from them how they coordinate on the ground with all of the agencies, if DEP, if there's asbestos suspected to be present, they get DEP involved. They do a lot of work on the ground, and it's helpful to have that perspective. It would have been helpful to have that perspective here. And so on Councilmember Gutierrez's bill 749, creating the Office of Residential Displacement Remediation, that we didn't get a firm answer today on the administration's perspective, but I certainly will be following up along with Councilmember Gutierrez to make sure that we understand where that function could live and should live, so that folks are able to get the best information possible when they've gone through this life-changing event. With that, any final?
I want to thank you all for coming and for your answers and agreeing to get back to us with any answers to our questions that you did not have with you today. We appreciate that. I'd also like to thank the Fire and Emergency Management Committee staff, our counsel, Josh Kingsley, our senior analyst, William Hongash, the Legislative Division, and my amazing Chief of Staff, Phyllis Cirillo. Also, it is a pleasure to host a hearing with you, Council Member, and for the Council members who did come today to ask very important questions. Thank you so much. You are dismissed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again to the members of the administration. We will now open the hearing for public testimony. I remind members of the public that this is a formal government proceeding and that decorum should be observed at all times. As such, members of the public shall remain silent at all times. The witness table is reserved for people, those are not members of the public. The witness table is reserved for people who wish to testify. No video recording or photography is allowed at the witness table. Further, members of the public may not present audio or video recordings as testimony, but may submit transcripts of such recordings to the Sergeant at Arms for inclusion in the hearing record. If you wish to speak at today's hearing, please fill out an appearance card with the Sergeant at Arms and wait to be recognized. When recognized, you will have 2 minutes to speak on today's hearing topic of residential displacement after emergencies, including the following legislation: intros number 749, 750, 751, 817, and resolutions number 307 and 802. If you have a written statement or additional written testimony you wish to submit for the record, please provide a copy of that testimony to the Sergeant at Arms. You may also email written testimony to testimony@council.nyc.gov within 72 hours of this hearing. Audio and video recordings will not be accepted. I will now call the first panel. Monica Mercola, Legal Aid Society, Jessica Belinder, Yolanda Richardson at 2910 Wallace Avenue, Vanessa Perkins, same, Kelly Rowland, same, and Ricardine Verdiner Bernard. And I just want to especially thank the residents at 2910 Wallace for being here today while you're in the thick of it, this having happened so recently to you. We're here for you, and thank you for joining us. You may begin when ready.
Just press the button. Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Yolanda Richardson, and I am a tenant of 2910 Wallace Avenue and part of the Tenant Association as a lead. My family and I have lived there for 25 years in that building, and we are displaced and lost everything. And thank you for this opportunity to share my concerns. I sat here today, and I came with a written statement, but I almost feel like it's out of the window at this point because I listened to a lot of what was said here between the fire department, the DOB, and HPD, and I'm disheartened because as much as I'd like to think we're getting the type of help that we should be getting, we are not. I'm a taxpayer. And because I don't meet the threshold of what a low income is, I don't get help. You know, they mentioned that the fire department was there in the building and they had helped everyone to facilitate getting their things. We did that. We got together, 2910 Wallace Avenue Tenant Association, and put together a WhatsApp of the tenants that we were able to get and created a WhatsApp so that we can put together a list of all the people who were able to go in and get their things, and we did that. I think it was the second or third day of the fire, we were in that building helping the tenants get their things. Alongside, after the fact, the fire investigators, Mark, Tony, and Lou, who were there. We came with our list and showed them to help them do the job that they were there after the fact to start helping tenants get their things. So there was a large collaboration between all of us. We do not have HPD in the hotels with us. We stayed at the Residence Inn Hotel, Radio Hotel, and another hotel further downtown. And I myself there 2 months in that hotel. No one from HPD had come there to help us in any capacity. The Red Cross turned our situation over to the HPD after the fact. I know my time is up, but I think all departments should be talking. Across the board, fires are happening to everyone. It is full circle, and we all need the type of help that we need to get to be able to afford the cost of living that is happening right now when we are displaced and can't afford it. We're from rent-stabilized buildings, and we're forced into this entity that we didn't ask to be here today, but we're here. And everybody needs to be talking to each other so that we can get the right type of help that we need, because we're not getting it. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Good morning. My name is Kelly Rowland. I want to thank you for the opportunity to actually hear us out today. Thank you for taking the time to allow us to attend this meeting. I will piggyback off of everything that Ms. Richardson said. I'm part of the Tenant Association. We basically did our own roundup to get the people to do what they needed to do as far as trying to get some of their belongings. The fire department, I believe the first 2 days, and the police were there. Once the fire happened, the apartments were open. We were robbed. There was vandalism. There was nobody there to protect that. We believe that a lot of the inside people, Super and his tenants and helpers, took part of that. If it wasn't for us to make a police report, our items would not be retrieved or even found or thought of. As far as the programs, I give big praises to Red Cross. They were the only ones that really stepped up. They got us in, registered, got us in a hotel. I know you have a 3 to 5 day window. Some of us had 3 months, 2 months, 2 weeks, myself. And once you were linked with HBD, the rule is if you have a pet, you are not allowed to stay in their shelter. There are a lot of tenants who are misplaced because they're undocumented. The landlord did not receive a list or give a list of the people. Some people got scared. They accepted their deposits back or were told by the landlord, I'll get you a place, all in conclusion to make sure that we do not sign anything for lawsuit. So these people were scared. They had no place to go. So you won't get everybody as part of it, the whole lawsuit. As far as the HBD helping, like I said, you get a link giving you HRA, home base, help us, which if you're a working tenant, you don't get any assistance. We don't qualify because we don't meet that income. You're on your own, basically, to find shelter. They do not follow up with us. We had to reach out consistently to speak to the workers there to see if they can help us in any type of way, but it's not being done. So everybody is really still misplaced. I'm staying with friends. My time is almost up, but we don't have the actual help that we need, so we're asking that they could be a little bit more diligent in helping us.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to take a moment to just like snap my fingers and just agree, because the constituents in my district have been through this, and it's been me, literally me, with a little pen and paper trying to figure out, okay, who lives here, who doesn't, how are we going to coordinate getting things. So applauding your leadership in being able to coordinate that. My client, that's my baby. I'm gonna go grab her and try to calm her down, but I'm listening. I'm technically on maternity leave, so I'm listening on Zoom as well. And so please excuse me that I'm not physically here, but Chair Ariola is, and please continue.
Hello. I think so. Hello, my name is Vanessa. I've been in the building for 40 years. I never thought I'd leave the building, but piggyback on what my constituents here have said, the help that we should be getting, we're not getting. We find that people come from other places and they come and they get all the help. They get the vouchers, they get to this, they get to that. I'm retired for 14 years. I can't begin to pay rent for $2,400, $3,400. It's impossible. What are we gonna do? They sit here and they say that they do this, they do that, HPD does this. You don't do anything for us. You say I make too much money. I'm retired. How much money can I be making? I can't get any assistance. Now me and my daughter are displaced. She's one place, I'm at another place. We have all these new buildings. Why can't we be put in the buildings? Why can't we get a voucher so that we can afford to be in the building? This isn't fair, it's not right, and something needs to be done now.
Good morning, everyone. Before I start my testimony, I just want to say on record that what the Deputy Commissioner of HPD and the Fire Chief have said, some things weren't our experience. It didn't happen. But my name is Ricardine Verdinier Bernard. I am a tenant leader and have been living in 2910 Wallace since I was 7. So that means I've been there for 32 years. Let me start off by saying there aren't enough words in my lexicon to express what my family and I experienced on January 10th. And since that day, our lives has been upside down. The need of support and comfort has been something we have been searching for, yet is nowhere to be found. It is absent, we are lost, we are hurt, and we are angry. Nonetheless, we are confused about what has been bestowed on us. Because during the weeks of the fire, I've learned a harsh reality that there is no real support for working class. My husband and I work so hard to provide for our family, but because we make a certain amount, we don't qualify for many assistance programs. Although we are in the Family Living Center, we are still homeless. We are struggling and the system has no safety net for people like us. It appears that fire victims fall through the cracks of bureaucracy. And 2910 Wallace had multiple complaints and violations, specifically 9 violations that day. We begged for repairs and we were ignored. 311 was called, then HPD was contacted for recurrent issues and nothing was resolved. It was just a Band-Aid over a deep wound. Slumlords are notorious for intentional negligence and they get away with murder. The housing business is the only business that you can get rewarded for providing poor service. So I stand before the City Council and I urge the city to act against slumlords before more lives are lost and more families are being displaced. So I am proposing the following. No more allowing slumlords to cover up their problems. No more allowing slumlords to cover up the problems before inspections. Unannounced mandatory safety inspections of all rental properties owned by landlords with prior violations, and immediate seize of properties owned by slumlords who repeatedly neglect complaints and inhabitable conditions, a tenant ownership program that allows residents to take control of abandoned or neglected buildings, criminal charges for slumlords whose negligence leads to fires, collapses, and other disasters, and lastly, and most importantly, emergency housing assistance for working class families that are displaced. We aren't asking for handouts. We are simply asking for justice. Safe housing isn't a basic right, safe housing is a basic right, not a privilege reserved for the wealthy. Thank you, City Council, and may God continue to bless us all.
Thank you. I just want to take a moment to thank you, Ricardine, because not only are you a tenant leader in your own building and you're coming to us with real points of action, which I'm excited to talk to you about because we are trying to accomplish some of those things that you mentioned in your list. But you're also a leader in my section of the Bronx, and I really appreciate the work that you do at Good Shepherd Services, and someone like you who's giving so much to so many parts of the Bronx. You know, it's an example for all of us, the way that we need to be able to support you. So I look forward to working with all of you and all the families that are impacted by fires each year, because the city can and should do better.
I appreciate you too. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Monica Mercola, and I am a staff attorney with the Legal Aid Society's Housing Justice Unit Group Advocacy Team, where I help represent and advocate for displaced residents. The Legal Aid Society has been assisting displaced residents for decades, and through its work, I and others have seen the successes and the pitfalls of the process. The residents who have testified and will continue to testify today will share with you how they have felt abandoned, how they have had to navigate losing their possessions, their homes, and sometimes their livelihoods. How this system, more often than not, has failed them. As mentioned, you have heard and will continue to hear from residents about their personal hardships and their experiences of displacement after a disaster. The Legal Aid Society has worked with hundreds of similarly affected residents, and we have heard from almost every single client the same concerns. While our written testimony goes into greater detail, I would like to highlight 3 practical things that residents want from their government. First, a navigator, someone to connect them with the emergency and social services available, who will stick with them and help them problem solve until they are able to move back into their homes or other permanent housing. Second, clear and concise public notices of when actions will be taken with respect to repairs to their homes and the ability to return. And lastly, third, enforcement, to ensure that their buildings and property are safely secured for when they are finally able to retrieve their possessions, and a clear process for being able to collect their belongings when it is safe to do so. Emergencies by nature are unforeseen, and during these times, our government has the opportunity and ability to help. This package of bills is the first step, but more work needs to be done. The Legal Aid Society supports these bills with amendments and looks forward to working with the City Council to further provide meaningful support to displaced residents. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name's Jessica Belinder. I'm a supervising attorney in the Bronx Neighborhood Office of the Legal Aid Society for our group advocacy team there. And I've worked with the council member and her staff, and I have to echo what your colleague said earlier. There are very few council members who are able to connect with their residents as thoroughly and as quickly as your team does, and it has really helped us to represent tenants in the Bronx. One of the things that was mentioned with respect to the sharing of client information or tenant information that we think is important, in order for all of the work that we do to try to get buildings back into a livable order, that work is lost or is not as valuable if the tenants who originally lived there cannot move back and haven't been able to preserve their rights to those units. And so what we would like to see, in addition to the legislation that's proposed, is some waiver early on in the document collection process, whether it's with ARC or with HPD or some other entity, that allows the sharing of that information not only with the city council members, but also with legal services providers. Because one of the things that we are able to do is ensure that tenants know their rights, ensure that they're able to exert those rights and protect their interest in returning, especially to their rent-stabilized tenancies. And in today's market, they often cannot replace the homes that they've lost, and so being able to return to those homes is paramount.
Thank you, and thank you so much to the Legal Aid Society for all the ways that you are there for New Yorkers when these things happen. I know for us, the building collapse, how many fires have we had? There's a District 14 resident over, I don't know if she's gonna be able to testify, but from the Davidson Avenue fire on 2 years ago, and it's just incredible the way, I think that of all of the work that we're talking about here, the work that you do to get folks rent reductions, to make sure that people know their rights, that is some of the most helpful work, that helps people get back on their feet. So thank you, Legal Aid. And I'd certainly thank you, Nicole, for still being here from HPD. And the agencies, I certainly want to talk about this. How can we, there are privacy concerns and et cetera, but how can we, one, make sure that the agencies are collecting contact information. Landlords have it, they collect rent, right? How can we make sure that we get that most efficiently? And then two, how can we, legally and, with all the compliance that we would need to do, how can we make sure to share that with our legal service providers and our elected officials and folks that just want to help, right? Because there's many that want to help. I know I was bombarded, with many of the emergencies that we've had because my office, we have these pink hats and we put on our pink hats and we go and talk to everybody when an emergency happens. And then those pink hats and that we scribble it down and then we put it into spreadsheets and then we're able to share with others, but it shouldn't have to be that way. That's so inefficient, right? So yeah, I just want to thank you so much for everything that you do, and thank you for sharing your stories, because this is the foundation of how we effectuate change. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
I want to call the next panel. And I want to thank Chair Ariola, and shout out to all the moms. We are the best at multitasking. The next panel is Melissa Orlando from the tenants of 4309 47th Avenue, Lacey Tauber from the Brooklyn Borough President's Office, Gabrielle Fantacone, Churches United for Fair Housing, Asher Willem, and Marcus Jackson from Encore Community Services. Serious multitasking. Okay, you may begin when ready.
Please, go ahead. Good morning. My name is Gabriel Fantacone, and I'm a civic engagement organizer at Churches United for Fair Housing. We represent a broad coalition of 25,000 members through our 40 church partners in Brooklyn and Queens, and we are committed to building comprehensive housing justice for working New Yorkers. CUF is proud to stand in support of the Back Home Act, as the legislation reflects our core values of dignity, justice, and safety for tenants facing displacement and increasingly volatile housing conditions across our city. Tenants in New York City live at an ever-increased risk of harm, trauma, and displacement from a range of disasters and emergencies. In just the past few years, we've witnessed the devastating effects of hurricanes, winter freezes, and numerous human-caused fires, such as the recent brush fires in Prospect Park and the tragic residential fires that have rocked communities in the Bronx. Meanwhile, affordability is plummeting and tenant protections are being eroded, with waves of evictions impacting our members again and again. These harms are deeply interconnected. Tenants, especially those living in unsafe housing conditions, too often receive too little support or protection from landlords or housing authorities. This cannot continue. That is why we're here today to reaffirm our belief in strong protections for all tenants and in the security needed to confront a future where emergencies of all kinds, natural, structural, or human-caused, are becoming more frequent and more severe. The Back Home Act is a vital step towards ensuring that our city's commitment to affordable housing includes robust emergency protections and enshrines the right to return home after a disaster. Tenants deserve to know that they won't be permanently displaced after tragedy strikes. We often hear stories of the routine exploitation faced by CUF's tenant members, many of whom are immigrants or people of color who are left to navigate disaster recovery alone. Despite their essential contributions to our city, these tenants struggle to support their families and lack the safety nets needed to recover from crises. And the Back Home Act is essential because it ensures that city agencies are equipped with the tools to protect tenants during and after emergencies and to prevent landlords from using moments of crisis to profit from others' vulnerability. This is the legislation that working New Yorkers need to seriously address the intersections of housing justice and emergency preparedness, and we especially recognize the vulnerable position that immigrant tenants are in, being targeted by federal enforcement and predatory landlords. This bill ensures that these tenants are included in vital protections and that they have the right to fair, safe, and contingency habitable housing, even in the face of disaster. Sorry, I know my time is up. CUF commends the committees on housing and fire for bringing forward this important bill. We urge the swift passage of the Back Home Act, that's intro 607 through 609, 749 through 751, 817, and Resolution 307, so that we can establish permanent protections for tenants against disasters, displacement, and injustice. Thank you for your time and your commitment, your continued commitment to the well-being of ordinary working New Yorkers.
Thank you so much to you and your organization.
Good morning, members of the committee. My name is Marcus Jackson, and I serve as the Aging Friendly Community Organizer for Encore Community Services. I thank you for the opportunity to speak on today's topic. We wanted to address homebound clients, older adults who are stuck homebound, and the food insecurity that they face today. Encore operates one of the largest home delivered meal programs with more than 750,000 meals annually to older adults who are homebound, medically fragile, and often entirely alone. For many, the meals we deliver is their only source of daily nutrition. The city currently only funds 1 meal a day for 5 days a week. This leaves thousands of older adults hungry over the weekends and undernourished every day. We are urging the council to expand meal funding to provide 3 meals per day, 7 days per week to older adults throughout the city who needs it. We also need reimbursement rates that actually cover providers' real costs. Food prices, labor, and delivery expenses have all increased, but funding hasn't. Without action, providers like Encore will be forced to make impossible decisions about what we can and can't afford to deliver. Finally, nutrition is only one piece. Our financial case managers help older adults apply for SNAP, manage healthcare bills, and access rent relief. They're essential to preventing hunger before it starts. Expanding funding for financial case management must be a part of the city's hunger response. Encore has been serving older adults for nearly 50 years, and we know what it takes to prevent hunger and help homebound clients who are stuck and in need. It starts with fully funding programs that work. I appreciate your time for today, and I really hope the committee takes this seriously. Thank you.
Good afternoon, chairs, and thank you for holding this hearing. My name is Lacey Tauber, and I'm here representing Brooklyn Borough President Antonio Reynoso to support the Back Home Act as proposed by Councilmember Gutierrez. Borough President Reynoso preceded Councilmember Gutierrez in representing Williamsburg, Bushwick, and Ridgewood, and understands firsthand why this issue is so important to her district. During his time in the council and as borough president, BP Reynoso and his staff have assisted numerous families who have tragically been displaced from their homes by emergencies, especially fires. However, as you heard, this experience isn't unique to that district. As of March 4th, the last day that HPD released its monthly data, more than 2,000 New Yorkers from all over the city were living in the various emergency shelters after being displaced. This experience can be massively disruptive for families. In addition to losing all or most of their possessions, these families are often dealing with being displaced to other neighborhoods, away from jobs, schools, doctors, and support systems. They're often forced to navigate complex and unfamiliar bureaucracies to access city services. Too often, their landlords don't give them a clear timeline for when they can return, and emergency shelter stays are limited. With our city's housing vacancy rate at the lowest it's been since the 1960s and limited affordable housing opportunities available, families who can't find permanent housing they can afford will likely end up in the already overcrowded shelter system. Where still some landlords have intentionally slowed down the process of making repairs, demolished apartments, or made renovations that did not accommodate existing tenants' needs in an attempt to collect insurance payments and or to displace their tenants permanently and in turn raise the rent. I'm going to skip for time comments on the specific legislation, but just add that BP Reynoso supports the other bills in the Back Home Act as well, sponsored by Councilmember Krishna, and that's 607, 608, and 609, and urges the council to pass them quickly. And just a final note that, unfortunately, due to climate change, the city is experiencing more frequent drought conditions that can lead to fire danger, as well as increased coastal and stormwater flooding. So these problems are not going to go away. Passing the Back Home Act is one of the ways we can prepare for this while protecting tenants and holding landlords accountable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Before I begin, I'm a tenant, and I would like to just say that what I've heard from other tenants, our experience across the board, every borough of the city has been the same. I think no matter whether it's a rent-stabilized building or not, income levels, we're all experiencing the same thing with the landlords. So, good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'm here in support of Resolution 802, introduced by my council member, Julie Wan, along with council members Sanchez, Riley, and others. Thank you. My name is Melissa Orlando, and on December 20th, 2023, I lost my home at 4309 47th Avenue, Sunnyside, Queens, in a 5-alarm fire started by a negligent contractor hired by A&E Real Estate. The contractor caused the fire through the use of a blowtorch to remove paint from a door frame in a vacant apartment in our building. This was cited in the fire report, and 3 criminal summonses were issued almost immediately as a result. I want to also just have on the record thank you to our first responders. That day, nearly 250 people lost their homes. It has been 469 days since the fire. A&E has done nothing to date to repair the building, which has a full vacate order, or to cover our now compounded living expenses. That is because they're currently not required by law to do anything. As astounding as that is, even when clearly negligent, landlords are not required to provide housing, support, anything. The little that we've received as tenants has been through ongoing negotiation and pressure exerted by all of our elected officials, including Councilmember Wan and State Senator Michael Gianaris. 4309 was a lively, vibrant community filled with generations of families, as well as new arrivals to Queens, immigrants, elderly people, people with disabilities, hardworking and caring residents, many who had been in the building for decades in rent-stabilized apartments. Imagine the shock of being homeless through no fault of your own and now having to pay rent that is exorbitant, I'll be quick, many, many times higher than what you had been paying, because we know how expensive New York City has become over the past 10 years. Many of my neighbors are still looking for accommodations 469 days later. Some have even resorted to sleeping in the subways. We are all struggling, and if you've never been through a fire or lost your home for any reason, it is life-altering. Imagine walking around your neighborhood feeling like a stranger, like you have nowhere to go. I was fortunate that I could stay with friends and my son could stay with his father, but that wasn't an option for others, and it should not be this way. Our landlord was negligent. Their contractor burned down our building, and yet they have to do nothing. We know what power the real estate lobby holds in New York, but there has to be a line. Help us to hold negligent landlords accountable and support Resolution 802, which provides through the state legislature that landlords that are negligent should need to pay for housing for displaced residents. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you to each of you for your testimony. I think, sorry, I forgot your name. Marcus, I think your testimony was a bit off topic, but we'll make sure to funnel it to the right committee. Okay, thanks. I'd now like to call Christopher Leon Johnson and Sharon Brown.
Yeah. Hello. My name is Christopher Leon Johnson. I'm here to support all the bills on the committee. I'm here to support all the bills on the committee for this. But they need, Ms. Gutierrez needs to, make it at least 5 days for all the tenants, for all the buildings to cure their violations for all of them minimum. I mean, not minimum, maximum 5 days, not 30 days. 30 days is too much for the tenants because, and everybody know they get harassed. But I want to know why is this little bald-headed Rebney shill, Kevin C. Riley, who's the chair of the zoning committee, is not supporting not one bill on this ticker today. Everybody know why, because he's captive to Rebney. He loves Rebney. He's a real estate tough guy. He tried his tough guy stuff with me on Instagram and Twitter, But I love to say to his face that he's a clown and he loves taking Revenue's dick up his ass. And that's the truth. He loves taking Revenue's cock up his ass.
I'm gonna
He's
have to cut you off for language.
I understand. But it's the
For
truth.
language, I'm
It's the
sorry.
truth. It's the
I'm
truth.
sorry. Everybody is entitled to
It's the
their
truth.
opinion, including you.
It's the
but
truth.
we have to maintain
Fuck you,
decorum.
Kevin Riley. I'll
We
say
have
to
to
you-
maintain decorum in the council. We have to maintain decorum in the council. Thank you.
Next. I'll follow that.
Sorry.
Apologies, yes.
My name is Sharon Brown from Rose of Sharon Enterprises. Before I start, remember the hostages, release the hostages, let Yahweh's people go. The fires that were in these buildings that you guys were speaking about, is it due to the landlord's negligence because of the lack of repairs? Or is it just fires that were started? Because some of the lack of repairs could be a part of the reason that exacerbated the problem that caused it, like people had to have heaters or whatever the situation may be. They need to investigate these landlords who are intentionally doing malicious evictions. Malicious eviction is where the landlord allows the place to be dilapidated and the premises is no longer viable for the person who lives there, and they refuse to make the repairs, but they still require the payments. We cannot have this. And then the tenants don't have heat, hot water. A lot of them, either they stay there and risk getting plug-up heater where fires and things like that start. I want to know the data on, if you can get it at some time, have the fires been caused by the plug-up heaters and things that people have to resort to? I also previously stated NYCHA needs to hand in reports to the city council to show, and HPD and the different people that are dealing with this situation, they need to hand in reports about what they are doing immediately. When the tenants are saying there's a problem and the tenants come here and talk about it and HPD testifies, they need to report back directly, because they're going to go around in circles and they're not going to get anything done and keep coming back here for hearings and nothing ever gets done.
Thank you for your testimony.
Okay.
We will now turn to remote testimony. Once your name is called, a member of our staff will unmute you, and the Sergeant at Arms will give you the go-ahead to begin. Please wait for the Sergeant to announce that you may begin before delivering your testimony. Andrew Sokolov Diaz.
You may begin. Hi, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry. Sorry, I'm having a lag. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. And now we can see you.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Andrew Sokolov Diaz. I'm the co-founder and co-president of 89th Street Tenants Unidos Association in Jackson Heights, Queens. When an 8-alarm fire occurred in my building in April 2021, my wife and our 2-month-old baby and dog were displaced and required to live in a hotel far away from home, which was Jackson Heights, Queens. My mother-in-law was also split another way, separating our family, and this happened to over 500 of us in the blink of an eye. We faced enormous financial burdens as a result of our temporary housing. For example, because my wife wasn't able to breastfeed our baby for several weeks due to the stress of the incident, we had to purchase expensive baby formulas for our child. We didn't have a kitchen in the hotel, so we had to eat our daily meals from restaurants, often at fast food chains, or whatever was close and doable. We even had mutual aid groups in our community, and our own tenants association had to organize daily nutritious meals for several weeks on our own because we needed that. Culturally relevant meals were also very important to our families. While I tried sourcing nutritional foods and meals, particularly for my wife who was still attempting to nurse, it was really incredibly challenging because we were in a food desert at this hotel site. HPD couldn't and wouldn't place us in a hotel or anywhere closer to home. Adding to our issues, my car broke down. I had several unexpected expenses, which led me to giving up my vehicle. Other than that, due to the fire, we had to replace our possessions, of course. My wife had to repurchase her maternity clothing, which is way more expensive than regular women's clothing, averaging several $100s that we had to shell out, very quickly. We didn't have time to save money. I also had to buy myself new clothes, our baby as well. We lost all our inventory of, diapers, all the things that you say about medicines, toys, pillows, bassinets, car seats, which was between $1,000 and $2,000.
Your time has
We relied on
expired. Thank you for your
donations as much as
testimony.
possible, but during the pandemic and with
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. We can let him conclude. He's the last panelist. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so after this 8 alarm fire, basically what we're asking the City Council and the agencies to do, which is so much more, and you're building on it, Chair Sanchez and Chair Ariola, is number one, build additional HPD housing citywide, but especially in Queens. We have 0 HPD family shelters in Queens, in the second most populated borough in the city. Number two, coordinate an immediate rapid response protocol for displaced families with their local public hospitals, so they can coordinate medications and prescriptions and disability equipment. Third, mitigate displacement by relocating residents and our animal companions as close as possible to home and mandate that the owners foot the bill. Fourth, and I'm almost done, ensure displaced residents obtain immediate access to their homes and their units to obtain identity documents and vital financial documents, even their money. Fire victims like us are almost always burglarized and forgotten. Ensure displaced rent-stabilized tenants and sub-tenants who are more vulnerable than us are better protected by having the agencies really hold the landlords accountable, especially when they allow their properties to deteriorate. This delays our displacement. Provide nutritional food assistance on site. Streamline the DACR $1 rent placeholder process. They make it so hard for us to just get that going. And finally, help us with housing discrimination and direct service deliveries so that we can find housing and stop going through this madness on our own. Extending hotel shelter stays for 1 month minimum is probably something that really makes sense, as opposed to having us go through the violence of losing our hotel stays within 3 to 5 days every time this happens. We have a ton of other information that we can share with the chair and the committees offline, but we want to thank the Legal Aid Society for representing us and providing us a dignified approach to rebuilding our lives. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Andrew. You are definitely speaking my language on what you went through, and I'm sorry. Is your baby 4 now? Wow. Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing your story and for those recommendations. We'll certainly be following up. Anthony Randolph from 2910 Wallace Avenue. Alex Stein. No? Okay. Yes. Okay. If we have inadvertently missed anyone that has registered to testify today and has yet to be called, please use the Zoom raise hand function if you're testifying remotely, and you will be called in the order that your hand has been raised. If you are testifying in person, please come to the dais now. Seeing none, we will now close the hearing. Thank you to the members of the administration, the members of the public who have joined us today. This hearing is adjourned.